Welcome to the MeidasTouch Network. I'm joined by Will Rollins, Democrat, in round two, running for California's redrawn 41st congressional district, which includes Riverside and within that, Palm Springs and neighboring cities. And he's running against Ken Calvert. Will is off to a record start. He's the number two highest raising challenger in quarter two, only behind Democrat Adam Frisch, who's, of course, challenging Lauren Boebert in Colorado. Will lost by only 11,000 votes or so in the 2022 midterm elections. It was indeed a nail biter, and we had Will on before the results of the election were handed in. And the Cook Political Report has just labeled this race from a lean R, lean Republican, to a toss-up. So, Will Rollins, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me back. It's great to be here.
I'm sure you get this question over and over again. So tell us, why'd you make the decision to run again?
Yeah, well, since it's just the two of us here, I'll be honest and say I wasn't sure that I was going to do this again. And for those of you who've had an odd job training experience in your lives, there's nothing quite as awkward as finding out that you've lost an election to Congress while you're on the floor of the House of Representatives, which is what happened to me in the midterms. And there are a lot of parts of running that are brutal, but given how close we came, being the only challenger in the state to win independence as a Democrat and having a great performance compared to President Biden's number in 2020 by House district, I had a lot of members reach out to me after the election and tell me their stories about running in a midterm when the turnout was lower and then coming back and doing it again in a presidential year and flipping the seat. And I think we built something really unique in our district last cycle. Ended up getting endorsements from not just Democrats, but the former Assembly Republican leader in California, former elected Republican sheriff in Riverside County. And I think, having been just a first-time candidate and only having 5 months after my primary, the folks who got to know me and saw the contrast between me and my opponent, they really broke overwhelmingly in support of our campaign. And I think this next time around, the more folks who get to know me, especially on the western side of my district, the better we're going to do in the presidential year.
I appreciate the candor because that's got to be super tough. I mean, you're there, freshman orientation. So you're there with people like Democratic Congress member Jared Moskowitz and other freshmen incoming class. You're going through the orientation. A lot of people thought that you had won and you had beaten this MAGA Republican, Ken Calvert, who's been in office, in California, for forever. Perhaps if there's ever a case for term limits, it comes to Calvert over here. So tell us, though, after you kind of learned about that, how long did it take you before you just decided, I'm making the call right now?
I mean, I think, looking back on it, and this is a true story, after I got an alert on my phone while we were on a tour of the House that I had lost the election. I was with the other members, and Speaker Pelosi was pointing out, where FDR asked Congress to declare war on Japan following Pearl Harbor. Got this alert on my phone from the LA Times that Calvert had won. And so my partner and I went to the hotel bar and we're sitting there. I was probably on my second IPA and look up and see Donald Trump announce that he's running again in 24. And I think from that moment, I think deep down knew that I was going to do this again, because the original reason I got into this race was helping my colleagues in Washington, D.C. at the Justice Department track down the people who had attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, and watching while my, representative, Ken Calvert, in our backyard in Riverside County, had gone out and voted to decertify the election, called for dropping charges against people who attacked the Capitol, and then, even voted against a commission to investigate what had happened. And so I just believe at a fundamental level that all of us have an individual responsibility to do our part to stand up and defend our democracy from these attacks from the radical right. And I think if you've got an opportunity to help retake a pro-democracy majority in the House, you have to seize it, and you have to do everything you can to win the seat. So,
and you use the term radical right there. It's the exact terminology we use here on the MeidasTouch network, because when they're sending congressional delegations to hang out with the January 6th insurrectionists and making songs with them that they're putting on Apple Music, and then we're going to talk about in this interview as well some of the things that they're doing using government to basically control people's bodies, to control what goes on in the privacy of people's homes. But as a former federal prosecutor, you worked in the counterintelligence division within the Department of Justice. When you see your opponent in this race, MAGA Republican Ken Calvert, supporting Donald Trump, supporting insurrectionists, supporting what took place on January 6th, I mean, how does that make you feel? And how do you message that to the people out there in the district that you're running in when there's so much disinformation out there?
I mean, I think there's some tension between, those of us who took the oath in law enforcement, right, and swore an oath to defend the Constitution, believe that transcends party, and people who took the oath in Congress who, unfortunately, like Ken Calvert, don't believe that it transcends party. And so, when you've got a guy whose priorities, again, are about keeping power, and who's been in office since 1992, when I was 8 years old, who's seen his net worth go up by $20 million since he was a member of Congress. I think that tells you everything you need to know about what his priorities are for the district. And if you're obsessed with power and you think Congress is a good way to make money, then it can be very lucrative, as he's proven to his constituents. But I think at the end of the day, what gives me a little bit of optimism and hope for our country, and for this district in particular in 24, is when you actually get out there and talk to average Republican voters. A lot of us want the same things. And these are process-based reforms and process-based populism that I think do cut through party lines. So whether you're talking about, prohibiting members from trading stock, whether you're talking about a lifetime ban on members of Congress from ever lobbying, whether you're talking about banning corporate and dark money from our political system, there actually is a lot of potential for unity there. And as an outsider who believes in all these things and believes in term limits, I've got a great platform and opportunity to campaign on those very popular ideas that do cut across party lines in a purple district like mine.
Let's compare and contrast your priorities to MAGA Republican Ken Calvert. What would you say to the constituents in the 41st Congressional District and Americans in general? What are some of the most dangerous policies, some of the biggest red flags about MAGA Republican Ken Calvert's policies and what he's been voting for?
I think the most dangerous part of his entire tenure in the House is you can't trust the guy to do what he claims he'll do. I mean, he campaigned on inflation, crime, and homelessness, and his first votes in office were to gut the Congressional Ethics Office. He voted to keep George Santos in the House. And just, the last couple of weeks, he's voted to make it harder for our women in uniform to get reproductive health care, and has been attacking the LGBTQ community, just voted to defund meals for senior citizens who happen to be LGBT. So if you've got someone who's obsessed with culture wars versus trying to make traffic a little bit better for people in Corona, versus trying to lower rents across Riverside County, which are at record highs, versus trying to fix our climate in a place like the Coachella Valley, which will become uninhabitable if you don't have smart leaders with a plan to actually combat climate change, I think the choice could not be clearer. And he's, doubled down rather than moderated to try to expand his electorate. And I think people are going to see that for what it is. And it's, an effort to placate a far right base and a desire to live in the 1950s. And I think most of us want leaders who are focused on tomorrow and making sure that this country continues to lead the free world in the 21st century.
Yeah. And look, what you're saying about MAGA Republican Ken Calvert, and frankly, what his votes are saying about himself, is that he's not even a conservative. And I know, the media likes to throw around labels and, and they'll say, oh, you've got Will Rollins. He's a liberal. He's a progressive. And I think you wear that and embrace that, liberal progressives, same as I do. But often I say, but there are some things that if we're talking about like conservative, like preserving and protecting the Constitution, and I don't want the government in the doctor's office. I don't want the government in the doctor's office of my partner. I don't want people like Donald Trump and Ken Calvert making gynecological, decisions. Like I don't want them saying who can be married. It just doesn't sound like it's appropriate to label someone like a Calvert or a Trump or a Jim Jordan or a James Comer or Kevin McCarthy. There's nothing conservative. And I grapple just with these labels. And I don't just grapple with it. I push back against it. But he doesn't seem like a conservative, Calvert.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think Reagan Republicans would shudder at the thought of members of Congress visiting people who had been accused of inciting or participating in an attack on the US Capitol in prison, right? I mean, this is not a law and order party anymore. And it's certainly not a party that believes in small government. If you believe that federal law enforcement agents should be used to track down women who want to cross state lines to get reproductive health care, or who want to use search warrants to go into doctors' offices and make sure that you haven't sought reproductive health care because you've got an issue with your pregnancy. I mean, these are literal. I think people really need to think through the practical effect and consequences of the kind of Orwellian big government policies that the radical right is now seeking to impose on ordinary Americans, and especially women and vulnerable communities across our country. And I think there is nothing conservative about it. And I think it's exactly why we were able to get support in my race from a lot of moderate Republicans and independents. And, started my career with Governor Schwarzenegger out of college. And, even though I've been a lifelong Democrat, he hired a bipartisan staff. And I think he genuinely cared about listening to different perspectives and having these substantive policy debates that unfortunately are too often missing from our current political climate that we need more of. And I hope we get a normal Republican Party back in our lifetimes. But in the meantime, we got to be a big tent Democratic Party and bring in some of these folks who share that perspective on conservatism.
And with these MAGA Republicans, I highlight it on this network all the time, the hypocrisy, right? I mean, you got people like Jim Jordan, MAGA Republican chairing the Judiciary Committee, who was covering up sexual abuse at a university where he used to be a wrestling coach or an assistant wrestling coach. You have James Comer, who chairs the MAGA Republican-controlled Oversight Committee, and his former girlfriend said that he was someone who forced her to get an abortion and who was very physically abusive to her. And when we talk about Ken Calvert, look, I can't ignore the hypocrisy here. This is someone who wants to control women's bodies, who wants to tell people who you can marry, who attacks the LGBTQ community. And this is someone, when he began his political career, look, I'm just going to say it, was caught with a prostitute, denied it, and then justified it, saying that he was very, very lonely. And now he is the person who's basically saying, I'm going to control how other people have sex. I am the arbiter of what's right or wrong. And that hypocrisy, to me, is what is particularly glaring. And I wouldn't even call him out for that if he just left people alone. Like do your own thing. But, when I was looking at his background from April 27th, 1994 Los Angeles Times article, Scandal Imperils Young Political Career, Politics. After months of denial, Riverside congressman admits sexual relations with a known prostitute. Quote, I was feeling intensely lonely, he says. Now, this is the man who wants to control women's bodies. This is the man who wants to tell the LGBTQ community what they can do, who they can marry or who they can't marry. To me, that hypocrisy needs to be called out. What do you think?
I completely agree. I mean, the guy, it's unfortunate that somebody who claim to have felt loneliness during that period of time is unable to relate to people who, have spent their lives feeling marginalized by their government or being told that they can't be who they are. And so it's kind of an astonishing lack of compassion for, I think, his fellow citizens. And it's also, a reflection of a detachment from reality. And I think that anybody who cares about ensuring that we have our personal freedoms and the philosophy of live and let live, which used to be a philosophy, I think that a lot of conservatives and libertarians, I think, embraced, and I think a lot of ordinary ones still do embrace. We have to be focused on making sure that people who have this kind of hypocrisy in their own lives and their own platforms are defeated in this next cycle. And I think the silver lining of our last election, the closeness of it, and again, that broader coalition that we've started to develop in California 41 is that expanding group of us will flip the seat next year. And the numbers of people who have been in office for 30 plus years, who have gotten themselves into the kind of scandals that Calvert has, their days are numbered. And we're going to win this thing come next November.
Do you think the people in the 41st are understanding what is happening in these congressional hearings where the MAGA Republicans are calling in fake whistleblowers? They're literally conspiring with Chinese spies to try to attack President Biden. You have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, a great friend of Ken Calvert, showing non-consensual dick pics in a congressional committee hearing of Hunter Biden and their obsession with someone who's never even been in a government position before. Like, do you think that gets through? Is there a lot? We cover it a lot here on the network, but I'm not sure if local media is doing it. And is that some work that you have to do to basically say, hey, do you want us to focus on healthcare and education and jobs and infrastructure and economy? Or do you want Marjorie Taylor Greene showing non-consensual dick pics in a congressional hearing?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of our problem, right? Is unfortunately after 2016 and with the last presidency that we had in the United States, people have gotten so fatigued from bullshit. And if you have a constant stream of it and you lose sight of how to prioritize government, people start becoming very cynical. And they also get hunkered down into their own comfortable echo chambers. And I think that it's incumbent upon people like me who are running for office to go into Republican clubs, Republican organizations, and try to penetrate some of those echo chambers. Because I'll tell you, some of the most rewarding experiences that I've had as a candidate have been going into places that are traditionally conservative, like a Norco Chamber of Commerce event, and just listening to what kind of practical problems people want solved. And in the case of that event, it was a city called Eastvale in my district that needs its own zip code. And I kid you not, during this same meeting, a local far-right assemblyman, a representative from his office, gets up and says, hey, I just want to make sure everybody knows about our bill to require parents to out LGBT kids, to require teachers to out LGBT kids to their parents. And I want you all to support that bill. And everybody in the room who had been there to talk about a zip code issue kind of just looks at each other like, what is this person talking about? And why is the focus on, again, Orwellian teacher surveillance as opposed to just fixing a goddamn zip code issue for the city of Eastvale, which is looking for it. And I think that it's just emblematic of this kind of weird focus that the far right has on angertainment, as Adam Frisch calls it with Lauren Boebert. I mean, I think that is become, unfortunately, a new form of political strategy, but I think most ordinary voters are going to see right through it.
Yeah, as we say here in the MeidasTouch network, I mean, they're focused on attacking Bud Light, the Mr. Potato Head. This week, the Barbie movie, the MAGA Republican said was a Chinese communist conspiracy, and it was too woke, and woke this and woke that. And I just think the American people are like, what? Like, to your point, all right, what's the zip code? Is that going to help me in a material way? What are we doing with jobs? Hey, by the way, I see new bridges and roads and stadiums and fire departments and police departments. I see a bunch of things being built right now. That's a good thing, and so let's shift from kind of MAGA Republican world and, let us know if you're in the House, what would your priorities be and what would your main focus be?
Yeah, I mean, I think the top one for people in my district, it really is infrastructure. So if you have ever, tried to commute from Corona to work, you are sitting in an enormous amount of traffic. And we've got massive freeway issues there. We've got massive public transit issues that need to be addressed in places like, the Temescal Valley, Menifee. There are people who are stuck living most of their lives on their way to and from work instead of at home with their families. And you have to have a leader for the county that has a 21st century vision of a commute and transit that is just going to make everybody's life better, because traffic sucks no matter you're a Democrat or a Republican, right? And I think, so that's one of the top ones. I think another huge one for our district is trying to keep pace with the cost of living. And we've got a great part of Southern California to live in. We're blessed to have it. But in fact, people used to move out there because it was more affordable than LA County. But that has rapidly changed over the last 5 to 10 years. And I always like to tell people, there's only one candidate in this race who's raised your taxes, and it's Ken Calvert. He was the guy who did exactly what Trump told him to do in 2017 and increased taxes on homeowners and folks who live in blue states when Trump wanted to punish the blue states with his elimination of that state and local income tax deduction and the reduction of that mortgage interest deduction too. So, Calvert, if we had a truly independent member of the House who cared about delivering for his constituents, they would have stood up to the president and said, I'm not supporting that bill. It's going to increase taxes on my constituents, where the average income per household is around $80,000 per year. So I think trying to, actually deliver a meaningful tax break for working families instead of continuing to give these massive trickle down cuts that have been proven for decades to be ineffective at growing our economy is another huge priority of mine as well.
So you mean to tell me transportation, keeping up with the cost of living, tax relief, you think those issues are more important than attacking the Barbie movie, Bud Light, and Mr. Potato Head, like Ken Calvert and the MAGA Republicans are focused on? That's you believe you're going to run on that.
Yeah, and as a gay guy, I hate to say this, but they're also more important than dick pics. So I'm going to be honest about that. And look, I think this is the problem: is that the barrier between government and our sort of culture has come down in a way that I think most Americans don't want to see. They don't believe that Mr. Potato Head should be the subject of debate by members of our political leadership, right? I mean, I come from a family that is split between Republicans and Democrats. And I think part of the way that our country functions is by, sure, you want to have debates about whether, Barbie is a Chinese communist plot. You can have those debates with your crazy uncle in a bar after, a shot of Jameson. I don't think you want to see that debate happening on the floor of the House of Representatives. It's a complete waste of our tax dollars and our collective energy as a society to get tied down in these bullshit culture issues that most of us are just looking for a functioning government that's going to solve complex problems. That's the point of government.
Will Rollins, I appreciate you joining us here on the MeidasTouch Network. I bet this was slightly different than some of the other interviews you've done and will do, but look, we got to speak real, and we got to speak to the American people and have these just real conversations. I appreciate your authenticity. I look forward to following your race, and you're always welcome back here on the MeidasTouch Network.
Thank you guys for having me.
Hey, Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.